Hi, James. Thank you for letting me on. I think this is actually incredibly dangerous, and anyone who has any reasonable knowledge of statistics will know why. The reason for that is that correlation is not causation.
Hallelujah.
And when you are talking about variable A, which is nationality, and variable B, which is criminality, you're creating a link there that will make people say there is a causal relationship between it. Now, I can bore you with the statistics, but I'll do it very, very quickly just to sort of say what needs to happen is you need to be doing what's called a multivariate linear regression. So you look at the relationship between different variables and you extrapolate that.
Right.
That's something that if it isn't published alongside this, it is definitely going to do more harm than good. Because what it will do, people will have their own biases when they look at this information. If they think that Albanians are more likely, or Poles or Irish people or Nigerians are more likely to cause crime, they'll look at that figure on there. And we've seen this happening in two different areas, especially used by the alt-right.
Yeah.
So firstly, in America, when you're looking at prison populations and criminality, and also we've seen similar things happening in the UK in relation.
We've seen Trump say it about genes. He's talked about immigrants having defective genes, genes. I mean, that's about as close to eugenics as you can get.
Yeah, I can't see this leading anywhere good. And the problem is that bad data is more harmful than no information. And so if they were going to do a full proper analysis of this and demonstrate, and by the way, having looked at some of this data in the past, first generation immigrants commit crime at a lower rate than native born people. Once you get into second generation, they're pretty much the same as native born. You do end up seeing some correlations for other factors. So, for example, and I'm not saying this to stigmatise anyone, but certain conditions you can be brought up in if you're a product of trauma, if you've grown up in an unstable environment. And this is the thing, and that should be used to target support to those people. What we're seeing instead is a discourse that seems to be pointing in a direction of policy that is going to be used to demonise people rather than help and support the communities that are currently disadvantaged and are more at risk of falling into criminality.
And they're not, and there's no way that that's what they're planning to do, because they're only looking at people awaiting deportation. So all of the variables you've described, poverty, instability, trauma, are colour blind, they're nationality blind. And if they were really keen to prevent criminality that is born of some of those conditions, then, as you say, we'd be looking at the whole population, because the massive majority of people in all of those categories, simply by weight of numbers, is going to be native Brits.
Yeah, and I think there's a simple lie defeats a complicated truth, and I think actually, I don't know if you read Adam Rutherford's How Not to Be Racist.
I have,
and it's a fantastic book, and you'll realise that despite him writing that, there are still people who do not use that information. He didn't. It wasn't like game over. Adam Rutherford was correct. Here's the evidence. The difficulty is when you start putting information into the public domain that can be misused or misinterpreted. That's actually very dangerous, and that will put specific groups at more risk. So whoever's at the bottom of that league table, either people who have that identity, or, and I think this is important, people who perceive someone to have that identity. Because, as we saw with Islamophobia, there were Hindus, there were Sikhs who were experiencing discrimination in relation to that.
It's about giving permission, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
Tacit permission to hate.
Yeah, this is where I get concerned, is because when you look at good policy brings people together to solve a problem. Bad policy creates division and ultimately creates rifts that are then harder to put back together afterwards. I did start doing some statistical work around the British Social Study and the European Social Survey.
Oh wow!
But that's around attitudes, and so this is where you start understanding how you use a regression model, how you establish correlation. But you need really big and good data sets, and I think the issue is at the moment you won't have that, because you won't have the background information to put into that data set. This is just a simple league table. and simple league tables are very often more dangerous. You create oversimplified solutions.
Of course. So you lead me to the question that you've obliquely answered already, and you don't have to answer it. But why do you think they're doing this in the way that we think that they are doing it?
In my hypothesis on this is wanting to appear tough on immigration. And that's because they look at where they think they're losing ground to other parties. And so they think, well, let's say something tough on this. And the thing that concerns me is it's not as simple as just saying something. Words do have consequences, especially when you've got this kind of level of platform. Yeah. It might sound like this is a vote winner in an election. The danger is even saying this will lead to people, some of the conversations that we'll be having around it won't be the conversation you and I are having. Some of this will be.
Well, I can show you. I can show you what the conversation is, because oddly, while you've been talking, I've received these 3 messages. I've received a lot more than 3. Penn in Highgate says, "What a brilliant call, James." Mike says, "This bloke's very good." And Joe's been in touch to say, "I genuinely can't believe that LBC and James O'Brien have hit an all-time low of now apologising for the foreign criminals before they've even committed a crime now. The contempt for the British English from this show absolutely amazes me." Leaving aside temporarily the, quite spectacular logical inconsistency there, that perhaps is the kind of person that Keir Starmer is trying to appeal to. People who look at a foreigner and just see a criminal who hasn't committed a crime yet.
So this is where I think some bad politics comes from. You look at who is on the margins, who is an easy target. And if you look at how, tribal or group dynamics work, how do you push yourself into the centre? Well, you can push yourself closer into the centre by pushing the people on the edges further out. Yeah. That does not create harmonious societies. That does not create a better living environment for anybody, because you're just reliant on you being the in-group at that time. That's the danger of this. And I know it's not talking about complicated policies. This is the danger. Once you start having this discussion, the genie's out the bottle. It gets very difficult to put back in again. Yeah. But they're now going to have to produce a multivariate analysis to actually look at what are the causal factors, and then start looking at policy to, let's say at the end of it, they find out, well, there are issues that we have with criminal gangs from this country. But the problem is you're not going to find that from a league table in that sense. You need to be doing multivariate linear regression.
And whatever mode of research they undertake, the usefulness of the research and the wisdom of publishing it are 2 very different things.
Yeah, and if you look at actually a lot of the statistical analysis, and I'm quite often looking at the reports that come out of different government departments. When you look at those reports, you'll have a summary overview, and very often you'll have the headlines published off that summary overview. When you look at the actual full report, it tells quite a different story very often, and people do cherry pick data to make the case that they want to make. And that once that league table's produced, you'll have some newspapers writing one set of headlines and others writing another set of headlines. So I don't see where this goes in a good direction. Oh,
well, I did for a couple of minutes. I could see a vaguely positive analysis of it, thanks to Lee in Bicester, but just down the road in Solihull, it's disappearing over the horizon. Max, thank you. You clearly are expert in this field, and probably too modest to say so, but it's calls like yours that are most helpful to us. 11:45 is the time. Greg's been in touch to say you are using the same type of logic that protected the grooming gangs, which is, again, perhaps an indication of the kind of intellect that Keir Starmer thinks he needs to appeal to now. There you go.